for this Kerrville City Council Budget Workshop for June 18th. Are there any visitors signed up to speak?
No, sir.
Goodness, okay. As we begin the process to set a budget for next year, I want to remind our newest member that this is critical, because if it's not in the budget, it's not going to get done. And I also want to state clearly that we live in still in inflationary times, and so being cautious, especially with the ad valorem tax rate, is going to be something I'm going to focus on during the next meetings. So, with that, who is first?
Mayor, I'm going to kick it off. Mayor, Council, welcome to Budget Workshop. So obviously this is my first budget workshop as well, so there's a lot of things that we're going to kind of keep as status quo from what the team has done previously. We added a few things kind of in there just to, one, I want to see how things are done as well. We've kind of charged them with a lot of different visions and goals. We have incorporated some of the high-level discussions that y'all did on Friday at the strategic planning. Fortunately for us, a lot of the stuff we had already kind of factored in anticipation of those goals. If I had to sum up this entire kind of budget workshop or this budget this year, is really focusing on sustainability and capacity. To that point of, well, what is capacity? Does capacity mean we add more, or does capacity mean do we stay the same? You know, and get some things off of our finish line, get some things across the finish line, and continue to kind of move forward and build some capacity through time. And so as once Julie kind of comes back in, she's printing off a couple of the slideshow. She's right there. Sorry. You know, we're going to kind of go through this, and we really want this opportunity not to just be one-sided, one way. We want this to be a two-way conversation, of course, and get some feedback. But I am confident that there's a lot of things that we put in here that does factor in a lot of y'all's visions and goals and things that we've talked about. Again, focusing around sustainability, focusing around some of the inflationary challenges that we have, and really looking at the theme of Beyond Tomorrow and what does that look like. So, Julie?
Okay. Jacob's bringing you copies that we got kind of tied up in this expense report. This is something new that we've never provided to you before, so we can talk about that, or it might just open some questions for later, even at a different date. Just knowing this is preliminary at this point. So, okay. Ashley's gonna fix this up. So. So just kind of go over what our agenda was today, really just looking at our timeline and our process, what our top priorities were, and a lot of those, we kind of keyed off some things either from prior years or also from some things you guys really brought to the table on Friday. Looking at the budget theme and our approach to this year, a review of things that we've done and how we got here, and then just going through the general fund, taking a quick look at streets, debt service, asset replacement, and then talking about a facility fund that we've brought a few times to you, and then summing everything up today. I think we gave ourselves plenty of time. I think in years past, at least for me, I felt a little bit rushed. I don't know that we will need the entire time today, but I wanted to make sure we have plenty of time for you guys to stop, ask questions, give feedback, because this is definitely the time that we want to do that. We do have staff here as well if there's any specific questions. I don't know that we'll be that deep today, but they're definitely here to answer any questions if you need them. So looking at the timeline, back in October of 23, we started meeting with our asset team again. You'll know we've been working on that for a couple of years now, and I think we continue to make progress, and in my opinion, really close to having at least a full 5-year plan. We've really been looking at this year, next year, and the following year as far as what purchases need to be, but really looking at how we're going to fund that over time. February, all departments that had new requests, either personnel requests or new item requests, those were due to Kim or to finance at that time, so that we could start looking at that if it was a new position completely or just added personnel to existing staff. And then departments started submitting their operational budget requests, and we do that through our software, which is very user-friendly, and so it really allows departments to do their own work as far as entering their requests, within the software, so it's not, they're actually a big, very integral part, actually, of the whole budget process in general. So it just kind of walks you through there, and we've talked about this before. What we do, we get our preliminary roll in April and start kind of looking at how's that look from a property tax standpoint, what are valuations looking like, and those kind of things. Started having some budget workshops, and then, of course, certified property tax. FERCAT's deadline to get that to us is July 25th. It's super tight between the 25th and the 31st, so a lot going on there during that week. Our calendar's already blocked, and so so then we work through that process, and then we have outlined right now on the 13th, actually presenting the budget and the proposed tax rate to you for consideration, and then both public hearing and the second reading will be in September. So that's what we have outlined right now. Any questions on any of that? I know that's a lot of information. I don't want to read it all, but I think y'all are pretty familiar with that process.
So real quick on that, especially for new council members, and just reiterating, some of the stuff is dictated by not just our charter but also the state. And so while we say we got to present a proposed budget, to the clerk, that doesn't mean that budget's set in stone. It's just a proposed budget. It's an administrative check block that we have to do, both for our charter and our state. So there is some, obviously by that point, a lot of it's pretty much locked down, but just be aware that that is an administrative process that we have to do.
Okay. So we'll move on and just kind of talk through a little bit of our process this year. We always have a budget committee, but in the past it's been, few people, just because I guess of the nature of the way it's always been, for lack of saying it a different way. This year we kind of wanted to really starting with our asset team that we created a few years ago, give everybody kind of an organizational wide look at really what happens, instead of just looking at your own department, and not know how you fit into that, but really do you know how you fit into that? And so giving them kind of some opportunity for feedback, to answer questions, and to look at departments, especially the large ones that have multiple divisions, in a different way, so that they can see what really different departments contribute. So this was our budget committee, and basically what happened was, after departments put their budget requests in, finance worked with them to work through the first initial stab at it, and then once we got down to something that was, we felt, presentable to the group, then they came in and presented their budget kind of at a summary level to this budget committee. Talk them through what their department does, major goals that they have, what their process was in coming up with their budget requests, and then things that they might need now or in the future, and kind of what they have on their plate, basically. Alton, you guys have any input at all on that budget committee, like what you thought that worked or didn't work? Or
I'm a big fan of the budget committees, like Julie had said, just reiterating again. It gives insight into not just their departments, but kind of citywide, and just some of the challenges that are faced using multiple funds, enterprise, loss leaders, et cetera. Again, it's not necessarily sometimes the decision-making side, but it brings awareness to the entire city budget. Real quick, as we kind of move on this, one of the things that we did add, I'd say simplistically, we always talk about, in most budgets, and again, this is my first budget here, so I'm getting feedback from our team, is we kind of bring a conservative budget ideally to y'all from the get-go. We prepare it, we present it, and get feedback from y'all. What we are going to show is the asks. What was asked at the very beginning? The crazy asks, sometimes are like the front end, front load. We actually want to talk about those with y'all. One, it gives y'all kind of an insight of what the requests are coming through the departments and a lot of what they're seeing on the operational and administrative level. But it also brings awareness to council and the community that, hey, we are really looking and doing our due diligence on this process. We are taking a look at the priorities and what's happening and really being conservative from it. So it kind of a two-pronged approach on that.
Okay. So some of our takeaways from our retreat on Friday, we took just the top 5 bullets that came away from Friday, just to kind of make sure that you guys can see what we're working on and how that aligns with those particular things. And we didn't get too deep into this because it was just Friday, but my goal would be to link what we're doing within the budget already to these things and how they were prioritized on Friday. but then also looking futuristically if there's something we're not addressing, or maybe we're not addressing to the level that they were prioritized, that we look at that going forward, as we talked about, finishing at least the 2-year work plan and how that looks. So again, these were just the top 5 that got the most prioritization on Friday, so that's what those are.
And to the mayor's point, I talked with Mayor Herring the other day as well, and this included not just, stuff that had council priorities in it, but also included, some of the large ones that our team had included as well.
Y'all remember the,
So
some of
there,
the ones that had dots that had, okay.
yep, so this included kind of the high level ones of all. And again, we know this is new, y'all haven't officially adopted the plan from Friday, but we just wanted to, again, start showing where our plan over the past 8 months, and with Julie longer, on how do we do cost-based budgeting and priority-based budgeting going into in future budgets.
Okay, so I wanted to kind of give you a little bit of what led up to our theme, and just so you know, whenever we start talking about theme, we really are looking at what's our approach, what's our overview, what's our focus, and then we get input from staff and say, all right, this is really what we want to focus on. We need some theme topics, and so this theme actually came from one of our staff. So we loved it, and we're like, hey, what do y'all think about this? And so that's what we decided to go with as far as what we thought it meant to us from a sustainability standpoint. So if you were here in 2022, we used moving forward, and I think we were all feeling like, okay, this year we're gonna recover from COVID, and we didn't. We tried, but I think that lingered on a little bit longer than we thought. In 23, we used building momentum, and really we focused on the impacts of inflation that we started to see, overcoming, recruitment retention issues that we really saw really post-COVID, and that's kind of a nationwide problem. If you look at, if you have hired anybody, what you're paying people now compared to what you were paying people pre-COVID, that really did have a big impact. And then inflation, of course, on top of that. And then focused on, really regaining momentum related to completing some capital projects, looking at what our needs were, and getting back on track with maintenance components. And then last year, of course, looking up was for the obvious, but not just because of the eclipse, but really because things were kind of starting to, I'm going to gently say, level. We had kind of learned to cope with the inflationary pressures that we were feeling. I think that we did a pretty good job of presenting mostly a flat or just slightly increased budget outside of the things we couldn't control last year, and that's kind of what we've looked for 25. And so this year, really, we want to focus on sustainability. We've talked about that a lot over the last few years, but getting some of those pieces put into place, specifically long-term facility and asset plans. And this year, we focused on leveling operational budgets, just, what does baseline mean, and what do we have to have versus what do we really need to have, and that's something we're going to continue to look at going forward from a capacity issue, because as we talked about Friday, capacity doesn't necessarily just mean people, but sometimes capacity means funding and money to go do the things that you need to do. So you can have the people if you don't have the funding, kind of like having the shovel but no one to use it, or vice versa. And so what does that really look like? So we talked a little bit about that, and then, of course, we always want to preserve the impact to taxpayers. That's becomes kind of a slippery slope there what are the services that are really expected, and how does that look? And what does it take to get those services provided, whether they're needs or wants, just depends on what citizens really want to do. Looking at utilizing other revenue streams from grants, and I think departments have done a great job of that over the past few years, and we plan on continuing that even more. And then looking at some special funds and things like that from a revenue standpoint, where we can kind of fill the gap if we need to. So also, as we talked about Friday, really focusing on completion of current projects, whether it's CIP or internal. So a lot of times there can be projects going on that aren't necessarily on the CIP list. They're just things that are going on internally with departments that have either been on the project list in the business plan, or those kind of things that we just need to wrap up and kind of get our feet on the ground and look at moving forward. So our takeaways from this approach. Departments, they're very lean. I mean, operationally, they're lean. They didn't ask for a lot of brand new stuff. The things that they asked for, even some of those things got reduced as we were trying to bring to you guys pretty much an operationally flat budget. And those things can be limiting, either because of staff shortages or because of funding. And so those are things that I think this is going to give us a year to really look at, what does that mean, big picture. And then just looking deeper into the needs, whether it's to maintain or expand services that citizens want or need. And then, as we talked a little bit on Friday, where are outsourcing opportunities to help us fill some of those gaps.
And to add on to that, when we talk about capacity, there's a couple ways we can look at capacity very simplistically. One, we can either increase resources, increase personnel to accommodate that capacity, or we kind of level out and say, okay, let's get some things across the finish line. And that was kind of the approach with, with kind of the tight constraints on budget, with us having a lot on the plate. And you'll kind of see what some of the asks were. The asks were pretty substantial that we just didn't feel comfortable that we were going to be able to operationally sustain it conservatively. And so instead of taking the approach of increasing the capacity by adding more people, we took kind of more of a leveling approach to get things across the finish line and build capacity through accomplishing and completion.
So just to kind of support what we were just talking about as far as inflationary trends, you can see what we were dealing with, mid-year 22. I think we had a high of like 9.1% inflation, which was really huge, especially on the water fund, fuel, those kind of things. And I know the Fed has kind of said we want to start to hover around 2.5% again. We're bumping 3 now, so they held 1, so I'm not sure what's going to happen in the next few months. I think it'll be an election year, you just don't know. But we anticipate them starting to drop at some point. My guess would be after the first of the year, but I really can't predict that. So workforce shortages, and we've talked about this and what we've done to deal with that over the past few years, and I think that has been a big focus of this council and also the prior council, was just to focus on retaining and recruiting quality staff. So right now we have 26 vacancies, and that could be a little bit different. That was a couple of days ago. A lot of those in police, fire, parks, your heavy lifting departments. But you can see there kind of the history of what we did as far as budgeting, merits, and COLAs. Two mid-year COLAs. Then we had the formal compensation study that Kim and her team did, and we did some strategic market adjustments there just to kind of bring our staffing to the pay that was average for their position if that was required, and then what we've done over the years. So we feel like this has been a really heavy focus of ours, but not to say the problem's gone away, but I think that we've at least gotten to a point where we feel like we're at least competitive in pay scale now. So a lot of work to do still, but it could be getting a little bit creative there. So this is looking at new requests. So positions at the top, you can see this is what was asked for. As I said, they were supposed to turn their position requests in February, and so this is what came in. Request for 12 new full-time positions, 1 part-time position, and then those total position requests totaled about $1.5 million just to the general fund. And then items or upgrades, keep in mind, this does not include any items that were already scheduled to be replaced or that was just by natural order of things that we were going to replace. This will be brand new or upgraded equipment or software, those kind of things. So total requests, 1.6 million. That was back in February. So the initial proposed budget after all operating requests were submitted by departments was $41.5 million in expenses. After we've adjusted that down to everyone's assistance and a willingness to help me out with that, we're down to 39.7 right now currently with expenses. There's some unknowns in there still. So with the exception of personnel requests, most categories were flat or less than 23, and you'll see that when we go through this. So that was really kind of our charge to them was, let's keep it as flat as we can, increase only where we have to, and really take a look at the things that are optional, needs versus wants. So as of the 13th, the general fund was out of balance by about $625,000. We're still working on that, but there's a lot of things still that can happen between now and even next week. So we'll continue to monitor and update the property tax values because we can't, not even anywhere close to being able to talk about a rate because we don't know, what still ARB is going to do in those things. Monitoring larger revenue sources, sales tax is very volatile. We talked about that being healthy, but really being important to be conservative there because you just don't know. We've seen what can happen. You have COVID year, we're seeing 20+% increases, and that's just not real. And there's some things that, we were lucky, and that helped us out a whole lot when we needed to help us out, but we're back on track with that. Finalizing group insurance, there's a heavy impact to the general fund for that. Right now, I think you said it came back at 15%.
Came back, yeah, 25 and then
Yeah.
down to 15, but we're still negotiating at this point.
Yeah, so that could, reduce as, we continue to work through that
What
process.
was it last year, Kim? What did you bring it
I
down
think
to?
we ended up at
We
13.
did,
Okay.
Yeah.
started at like 30 somehow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it was high.
Yeah. And so, as they work through that, that's one of the things that takes a little bit longer to work through, and so, we budget for what we anticipated, and we hope that they're saving, so.
Yeah, we'll present that the second meeting in July.
And there's a lot that still has to happen. We'll keep looking at proposed expenses and update some of those, so still some things considering this again is still just in draft form.
And again, with that, kind of the bottom line up front stuff as we go through this, sustainability was a big piece in there. So if we would pull kind of the sustainability, R&M maintenance, fixed asset replacement, we would cover those costs. So when we built in some of those cash reserves into sustainability, that's what's kind of created some of the deficit that we're working through, so we can start preparing for the future. And that'll kind of come to light as we go through this.
So this is just your categories. You guys see these on a regular basis, but these are just our revenues, sources in the general fund. And we'll talk about those a little bit more detail as we go through, but I just wanted to point those out. Okay, so proposed revenues by category. Again, this is as of last Friday, so we're proposing today 39.1 million compared to 37.6 million last year. Remember that the golf course is going to be closed for renovation for 6 months. There's a little bit of an expense impact there, but we've worked through most of that and been able to reduce quite a few expenses, either through personnel reassignments or just various creative things that we've done there to kind of offset to make sure there wasn't a big impact. The pool will be closed. Those still both do have maintenance components that, there's still expenses related to those, but again, we've done our best to try to offset those as much as we can so that we don't have an impact. Services here includes EMS and solid waste. Now remember, that's just the landfill portion of solid waste. That does not include your curbside, because that's a pass-through expense, so the city only retains a small portion, like 5% of our total, just for administering that program. So there aren't a lot of revenues there. Intergovernmental is one of our bigger categories. That's going to be your Kerr County contract with EMS and your KISD contract for school resource officers. And so those change just a little bit year over year, depending on the people factor. So this basically just gives you, last year I think sales tax was budgeted at 28%, and this year it's 26%, but everything else really was very in line with what we've always seen as far as distribution of revenues there.
So you're expecting a decrease in sales tax from last year?
I'm hoping that we're gonna be flat. And I have a couple of slides on that, but I'm hoping for flat, but yeah, we'll see what the next couple of months bring. That is one that we literally update to the day, almost we file the budget, because until property tax comes in and we see, remember July, we're a 2-month lag, so we get sales tax July the 10th, it's from May.
Yeah.
So it's a lag there that a lot of it is just gonna see does it keep going up, down, or do we start to see some leveling,
Yeah.
We've gotta make a decision about how comfortable we are, so we really watch that 12-month rolling balance a lot. I gave you these truth and taxations, and for anybody who has questions on this, I'm happy to answer this. I don't know that you guys need a dissertation on truth and taxation again, but the main thing to point out is, remember that everything hinges on the no new revenue rate. So no new revenue rate is taking exact same properties this year compared to those exact same properties last year and saying we won't make $1 more using that calculation right there. That's the basics of a no new revenue rate. That everything hinges on that. So remember, we're limited by the state. Our tax rate cannot be more than 3.5% over that no new revenue rate. So
Unless it goes to the voters.
unless it goes to the voters, so there's a lot of caveats there.
So when they calculate that, does that include a change in valuations? Or?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. But again, it'll bring in. It's a huge, like 18-page calculation, and it's in the budget book if you want to walk through that. It's not complicated, it's just a lot. But it brings in all your values, but it still looks at if these properties are valued at $10,000 this year, but last year they were valued at $9,000. You have to set the rate to where that $10,000 doesn't generate any more revenue. So your rate's gonna go down. as your values go up, the rates are
That
naturally gonna go
happened
down.
last year.
Yeah, it's happened every year since 2019 when the law changed on. property
Except
tax.
for 2022 or 3, when we had to change the rate to accommodate for the bond.
Right, now that's on the debt side, so your M&O side is what's affected by,
But the rate did change because
the
of the
rate,
bond.
the rate did change on the debt side because of the bonds, yes, yes. But our M&O rate still went down,
Gotcha.
so that's
Because of-
naturally gonna
because of-
happen.
Because of increased property.
Of course, whether it's additional property or just increase in valuations on current property. And remember that new value added to the roll, so anytime someone builds a brand new house, it's not part of the no new revenue rate because it wasn't there last year, so that's a completely separate component. So, and I'll show you in a minute what that kind of looks like for this year. So again, this is just outlining the property tax rate process and how that happens, and we don't have to go through all of that. I know we spent a long time going through that last year. But if anybody is not sure or not real comfortable how that works, just let me know or let Dalton know. I mean, either one of us can sit down and talk you through that process. It's complicated, but it's not complicated. It's pretty simple if you can just break it down into terms people can understand. I think that's real important, just to know that we only have so much control over that, for a reason, but. So you were just talking about, what we're talking about new value. So this is something Jacob put together a few years ago that we really like to show. It's just really distribution of property taxes. So as you pay your property taxes, if you're a city resident, this is how your property tax dollar is distributed among taxing entities, so.
This is where we ran into the little fiasco last year, am I correct?
So we reported.
Thank you, that's
What
one
was that
clarification.
fiasco, remind me?
Tax rate was misposted,
Oh, yeah.
like a penny or something
Yeah.
like that, and it was,
It
yeah,
was 2 years ago.
was that 2 years ago?
Yes, welcome. That is burned in my memory forever, so.
Yeah.
Sorry to bring it up,
Yeah,
Julie.
I appreciate that. So, looking at property tax, we were just talking about on the new value, so you can see on the bottom here, now keep in mind, this is based on our current tax rate. We have about $36 million in taxable, or $37 million in taxable new revenue. So market value was like 46,000 or something. Taxable was 37 million, so on new value alone at our current rate, it's about $200,000 additional revenue to the general fund. So again, that does not count towards your new revenue rate on the first year. Second year it becomes part of your new revenue rate because it was part of the roll. So but this just kind of gives you a little bit of history as far as the blue on this chart is net taxable value. The yellow is new, and that green on the top is frozen, so we're about 31% frozen taxes right now, or about $1 billion in revenue $1 billion in taxable value that is frozen at whichever point in time that value is frozen. So about 395 million still under ARB review, so that's why it's really hard to make any kind of calculation on what a rate might be at this point. Okay, so here's some assumptions on property tax for this year. So we're estimating about 12.2 million. This only includes current year taxes, so it's not anything that people owe from prior years or anything like that. A 4% increase over last year on revenue, not the rate, just revenue, about 470,000. Remember, we're assuming 200,000 of that is probably going to be from new value, but again, there's some things to work through on that still too. Fiscal year '24, we had $540,000 budgeted more than fiscal year '23, or 4.6% increase. So as you can see that right now, we're looking at that increase being a little bit smaller, but again, a lot's going to depend on what the values actually come back. Let's see. So again, this is assuming the property tax rate remains the same or is lower than fiscal year '24. And we'll keep you updated as we get preliminary rolls and stuff like that, but it changes weekly.
On this one, 470,000 or 4% increase in property tax revenues. And then the next line, 540,000 or 4%. So that include both increased valuations and new properties or not?
Correct. That's the total dollars. So that'll be the total dollars on current taxes due. So anything that will be billed out in this current year. And then on the very first page of the budget book, we always have to put that really detailed description of where things come from, and we identify the new value right there as well. So you can see the true impact to the taxpayer.
I'm confused. So Joe asked about this line, one says 470, one says 540. I first thought that meant, it was the prior year. Was
It is.
Okay.
So
that
we're-
was for 22,
Well, for
23.
fiscal year '24, the year that we're in,
Right.
we budgeted $540,000 over '23.
I see.
And that included new revenue as well. This year, we're proposing $470,000 over last year. I just
So
want to
this-
clarify that. Huh?
This year,
Over this year, yeah,
this was last.
correct. The FY '24, the year that we're in. I was just trying to give you a little bit of history there.
Okay, the 220s in addition to that,
No, sir, it's included in that.
included in that.
Yes, sir. That's assuming that our revenues and current property taxes are 4% higher than what we budgeted in '24. For the year that we're in. We have 11.7 million budgeted, and we're proposing or preliminarily estimating 12.2. That makes sense? Dalton, anything on property tax? Okay, that's about sales tax. So this chart, we narrowed down to just 4 years. We have this chart looking at about 20 years. And it gets really interesting because the trend lines really stay the same, minus a few anomalies here and there. Someone who paid early or didn't pay on time or things like that that can skew it, which we know when that happens, they stay the same. The question mark is always, how's it gonna move? Is it gonna move flat? Is it gonna move up? Is it gonna move down? But month over month, the trend lines kind of stay the same as far as percent of the total that we collect on a regular. So I just gave you that trend line so you can kind of see that over years, and then the historical revenue that we've collected. And you can see that right now, 23's budget, 24's budget, the year that we're in, really flat with 23. We're kind of predicting the same thing to happen in 25. But again, we're watching that. We had a 5.5% increase this past month that y'all haven't seen that one yet. A lot of that's gonna be related to eclipse, how much we can say is really eclipse versus something else, we won't know, and we really won't know until we get July's to see is it gonna be up or down. So constantly monitoring that, and Jacob digs into the level of which taxpayers are paying regularly. Do we have any that are missing? Do we have any big ones that came online that aren't paying, those kind of things. So we really monitor that to a pretty granular level to see if we can rule out anything that's kind of one-offs that we wouldn't want to budget. Every 0.5% increase or decrease is about $50,000 change in revenue. So that's kind of the way we look at it is, what's it take to get to that and what's happening on the trend. So it's super volatile, as you know, and you've seen, over years how it can change quickly. We continue to be about flat or just slightly above fiscal year 23, which is good. But the good news is, when you go back and really look historically, we had those big years. But if you just take this year and go back to pre-COVID, we're almost 40% higher in sales tax than we were pre-COVID. So, yes, there's some inflationary factors there, but not 40%. And we've seen that growth in development, and growth in industries that are creating sales tax. So that's really what we want. So it's healthy, we just want to be careful with it.
Yeah, and the one thing we don't know, on the inflationary side is the buying power is obviously less. So are people not spending as much or doing what they were typically doing? So are we seeing that? So we're figuring just level it off, kind of see where we're going. We know growth has been consistently about 0.9% a year, just across population-wise, across the city. So we just took a more conservative approach on the sales tax this year.
And again, we'll monitor that and adjust as needed. But before we get into expenses, anybody have questions or comments or feedback on revenues at all, of any of our revenue sources?
We have so many variables still out.
Yeah, a lot of unknowns.
The biggest variable is going to be the preliminary values. We can get pretty close to it, just through projections and forecasting, but we really won't know. What we are pretty confident in is the fact that even at 3.5%, or what we'll call the voter approval rate, which is the highest tax rate that you can go to before it triggers an election is still gonna be either at or below the current tax rate.
Gotcha.
That's just naturally gonna happen.
Because of
the way the law
valuation increase.
Because of valuation increase and because of new growth. So in cities where build out has already occurred and you're just kind of in cruise control, you'll see that fluctuate each year where that could change. But in a city where even just, again, we're 0.9% a year, we're still gonna see that kind of increase. And so we just have to factor that in, because when it does hit that tipping point, we just have to be prepared for it.
Okay. All right, let's talk about the fun stuff. So preliminary expenses. The first slide is something y'all are used to seeing, and I tried to keep everything as, I'm gonna say, normal as possible, so it was recognizable in the way we were presenting this. So these are the categories that you see when we define them in the budget book. The handout that you got is probably more than you want. But if you look at it, this big one, you can see expenses by department, and expenses by line item. So you can really see where some folks have shaved some stuff, and then where your increases are and why those are relevant. So looking at this by category, 39.7 million at this point, keep in mind healthcare, group insurance is still a big one that's out there. That is included in the personnel category, so that's gonna include all your salaries, all your benefits, and all your travel and training, and I'll give you a little bit more on that. And again, there's more on that in here.
What was the percentage last year?
We increased the, personnel, I just escaped.
Go to the next slide. Next slide.
Those are dollars, yeah. I'll get it, I think it was like
6.
right at 6%. I just asked Jacob to go me the
Okay.
24 budget book for that reason. But anyway, that's what's encompassed in that personnel cost there, but again, you can see that in this in more detail. We had a decrease in supplies, and there's a couple things to point out. So things like office supplies came down a little bit. There's some reasons there. Chemical supplies, cost of goods sold, that's gonna be related to the golf course, pro shop being, we're gonna assume, down. And then, tools and equipment had a little bit of an increase, but we also this year moved all of the events that Parks usually budgets for within either their recreation or community events departments or divisions into the other category, into their own section. So now if you wanna know what we spent on lighted parade, it has its own line item, so we can look at it specifically. So before, if it was a supply, it went to a supply line and it was for the parade. If it was food, then it went to the, and so it was really hard to track. And so they went back and categorized everything, pulled all their event expenses together for the past few years, gave those to us, we lined them all out. So for this year, you're gonna see them budgeted individually, unless they're just really small events. And that way we can, it's a little bit easier for us when we ask questions to be able to do that. So I was gonna answer your question to the general fund personnel. Personnel last year up 6.7%. 15% increase in group health was the biggest driver there. So, and that's what we're waiting on again, so we'll see how that falls out. Maintenance increased there, but we did have a $100,000 street maintenance increase, as we've done, for the past several years, just in line with our street maintenance plan. And then services down a little bit, but again, moving those events out of there into their own category, offset that. We also went through and decreased some phone services related to built-in tablet services. I'm not sure what all, if we can get deep in the weeds on that, but we saw some decreases in some technology expenses where we're better utilizing Wi-Fi and some things that we already have, and that saved a bit of money. So there's some savings in services for sure. We're seeing,
Your workers' compensation decrease, is that because you got a better rate because of lack of claims?
TFL IRP did an overall 10% decrease for all cities and counties, or not cities and counties, but cities and school districts and whatever else they had.
Okay.
Yeah.
so we were happy to see that.
Yeah, what is that current rate, percentage-wise for our workers' compensation?
Hold on just a second.
Brenda's winning with the tough questions.
Oh, that's good.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Please.
Way to go, Brenda.
That's great.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
No.
it doesn't say on my report from
Okay.
the board meeting, but what it does say is there's a it's based on class codes for the SIC codes. And it's a $13 million decrease for overall.
It's
but-
about right at $19,000 just for general fund on that piece. And then,
Okay.
we also have some liability components and stuff, which those would go up, but
Yeah,
we'll take any decrease that.
right.
I was gonna ask those-
Shocking that, you know,
I was
I
gonna
was
ask
very
those tough
surprised.
questions, but Brenda beat them. I was gonna ask the tough questions, but
Yeah.
Brenda beat them too.
Oh,
I
then
was
you don't have
thinking
to. Makes your day a little easier, huh?
I'm not asking any more
Oh,
questions.
No, you are, please.
You will too. It's kind of like saying, I'm not gonna talk about something.
Oh, goodness.
So that, we did have some savings there, an increase in other, but again, that's where we moved the events, and so, there's some changes there. We had some dues and subscriptions that we moved, categorically, just because they made sense, they were in a software category and they really didn't need to be there, and so, thank you to GASB, we had to make some changes as far as to where we expense some things, so. Transfers out, one thing that's important on this one is, when I'm giving these budgets, I'm comparing to amended budget, and so, we did the cost of living increase in April, and so it's better to give you what's current, and so because we did that transfer out to asset replacement mid-year too, that's comparing to this, but really, what you're looking at is, last year our asset replacement transfer was $650,000, and this year we bumped it to $750,000, so that's on our 5-year forecast, and something we've talked about several times. And then we did have an increase to development services, just for operating, because remember, development services is part of the general fund, we just show it separately for accounting reasons. So when they have a shortfall in revenue and expenses, then the general fund gap fills that. But it will be no different than if they were part of the general fund, it's just the way we account for it, so that you can clearly see what we're moving. So any specific questions on that as it relates to this year or going into next year that you guys might have? Okay. Okay, a little bit different look at personnel expenses. We talked about what all was included in there. So we're assuming a standard 3% merit increase for general government employees. That's based on evaluation. And then a 3% step for all eligible public safety employees, and that'll be commissioned folks over there. And then it does include a 15% increase in group health, so if that comes back better, then we'll have some savings there. We just wanted to do worst case, because we just don't know.
No pressure to get it to 50.
It's a good pressure to get it to 5. That's what Kim's goal is, 5. Someone has to cook steaks for her, she can do that. A little bit of an increase in TMRS rates, but again, you're gonna see that sometimes when investment rates are up. So there's some different calculations that go in there. That's a big one that Kim will present to you guys a little bit later when she talks about employee benefit trust, right? Not today, but.
Kim can nerd out on that stuff, but
Yeah.
basically the long story less long on it is, we have a 2-to-1 match, 7% employees, 14%, from the city. Based off of a lot of different factors that you can nerd out on later, we are under that 14% on our contribution to the tune of about 11.69 or something like that.
11.39.
Close. So it's a good thing.
And we're heavily funded, what,
93%.
something percent was on the report, yeah, so we're doing really well in that regard. So remember, this personnel expenses here includes your salaries, your benefits, your travel and training, and so you can see how that breaks out there. Then new positions that are included in this right now, not to say that this is, again, this is draft. These kind of align with the priorities that were outlined on Friday. Somehow that just worked itself out. Assistant Director for Information and Technology. So one of the things, I think this is the 3rd year in a row that this has been a request. Y'all know what the technology department does, but now she's also taken on innovation. And so there's some new things that are going to be pushed her way as far as with Office of Innovation going away and that being merged with technology. So it'll be innovation and technology, is that correct?
Yeah, the Department of Innovation and Technology. Really, the innovation piece is really a kind of an offshoot of what it was initially intended to be, focusing more on how to utilize technology to be more efficient, cutting costs in some areas, from that. City University, Citizens Academy, revamping some of that. So that's really kind of the focus on that, working with the departments on helping, efficiency from a very simplistic level. So.
The other thing that has happened is that the garage is now under the direction of Public Works. So Stuart and his team are going to be supervising the garage.
Where was it?
it was under innovation. Well, garage is its own fund, remember, so it's not part of the general fund. It's funded by the general fund and water fund. But before that, it was under the Office of Innovation as far as supervision. So now it's going to be under Public Works. And so when we went through that reorganization process, we brought purchasing back into the finance department, which is really where it should be. And so you'll see an increase there from the shift from the garage fund, but then a decrease on expenses because we're not transferring that money out to the garage fund. So it's really just an alignment piece there. But that's going to allow us to have a dedicated purchasing compliance person on staff, which is really needed. And they won't just be doing purchasing, but be doing a lot of GASB accounting things that align with capital leases and those kind of things. And then also contract compliance and things like that. So that'll be happening. But again, you won't see an impact other than an increase in one and a decrease in another. Redefining some light equipment operators in the street department. Basically, they're all doing the same job, but paid for at different levels, and so that's just kind of a staffing alignment situation. And then we still have in consideration 3 EMS personnel, and there's some others that I wouldn't say are necessarily off the table. We just, at the point where we were with the resources we have, that's still some processes we're working through, so.
Yeah, not really on this budget, but as over the next 6 to 8 months, as we kind of work through some things, we are working with each director on, some of the challenges of entry-level positions coming in. As a former paramedic, there are some challenges in retaining paramedics, especially with the private sector. So we're going to be working with our teams on what that looks like, how we can, try to align some of their business models and figure out how to get creative on retention and recruitment. So some of those things are going to be coming over the next, 6 to 8 months.
Julie, does this include the budget for 26 vacancies that we have as highlighted on?
Yeah, they're budgeted within there, so we budget for every position that is here. The only thing that we do, put some salary savings in like a general operations line for an overall fund. So that way we're not seeing, crazy fluctuations in salary. So we budget for every position that is approved. And then if we have vacancies, then we keep that in a separate line, and that just kind of, it gets offset at the end of the year. Because we know there's going to be vacancies, but we don't want to budget them at department level because then you might leave a department short because you assumed they were going to have X vacancies and they didn't. Meanwhile, another department had overages, because at the end of the day, the general fund's a general fund. So you'll see that on this guy right here. It's actually on the last page. It's in 0190. That's in our general operations. You'll see it in salaries, and you'll see salary savings there. That's why it'll look at expense line. There's a credit of $150,000. It's on actually the very last page, at the very top. And so you'll see that. Flip one back, Jeff. It's on there. Yep. See at the very, very top of the last page right there, where it says salaries and wages.
Yes.
That credit right there, that's an assumption of salary savings, which that's a low assumption, but we don't want to go crazy on that. It gives us a little bit of a way to offset some of the vacancies without putting them at department level and putting somebody in a bind.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
You've got here 2 parks maintenance personnel.
Yes.
To allow dedicated staff for public safety facility. And it says it's a partial year, so
Right.
are we assuming that that complex is gonna be up and running by fall? And then you're gonna need dedicated staff for that? And then next year we'll be budgeting full-time positions
correct.
for that, okay?
They'll be done.
And that's an assumption right now that dedicated staff is going to take care of that. So there's
Yeah.
a lot of still unknowns,
Okay.
but that's the assumption right now. that they'll have to do.
Construction will be done by June,
Mhm.
and
We
we'll
assume
start
July.
moving furniture in, but you know how it is, immediately it's dirty, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'll have to be in there working on it.
I think we budgeted them July with the understanding that if we need them a month early, then we'll,
Mhm.
but we want them in there and within the budget and approved so that we can add those FTEs.
Yeah, and this kind of completes the objective of the Public Safety Center facility and council's objectives last year on public safety. So this just kind of fulfills that on that personnel request. Some of the things we'll still talk about, and it's a constant conversation with our directors on many different things, is whether we outsource or whether we bring in-house. Because we already have our kind of maintenance and janitorial staff in-house, we said, hey, why not try to create those full-time positions? But we may bring something, a different option later. But as of now, we recommended bringing them in-house.
Any other questions on personnel?
Not for me.
That can be a lot, I mean, we're in the, without them, we can't do the work.
Brenda, I apologize, I was just.
Oh, no, no, I'm just
Ask as
teasing.
many as you want. I loved it that they both had to dig to find.
Yeah.
Okay, this is just another slide on personnel, I think I showed you this last year. Public safety continues to be our top priority, I mean, that's what Kerbal 2050 tells us to do, that's what our budget continues to show. So just wanted you to look at personnel. The interesting thing to point out is when you look at the total public safety preliminary budget, and this is all things inclusive, $20.1 million, and our property taxes, give or take 12. So just to point out that,
Yeah.
I think it's important to know that we do use other revenue streams to provide services that we provide. Okay, quick look at street maintenance. So I asked David to kind of put together his kind of layout of what was going to be happening in '25. Keep in mind, this is preliminary, but he can certainly answer any questions that y'all might have on streets. But right now, this is what's been identified as the maintenance list for the upcoming year. And then, again, we had that $100,000 increase in the street maintenance line item that we'll add to this. And I was surprised, I think, as we talked about Friday, that streets didn't float to the top of everything like it has in the past several years. And I think that just speaks to what's been done by this council, by the past, 2 or 3 councils to address that issue. And I think David and his team have done a great job of
Agreed.
getting us back in place.
And I think we've increased the budget this year on roads by, I think, about
100,000.
100,000.
And what's the difference between Lower Street North 1 and Lower Street North 2? Is it just 2 separate timelines for the same street, or?
It's 2 different street sections.
Okay,
It broke down Lois as 2 of them.
okay.
Anything else on streets, questions or comments on that? I'll go through this pretty quickly. Okay, what about expenses in general? I know we talked a little bit about this stuff on Friday, but anything specific that you guys want to know or would like to see more detail on as far as expenses related to the general fund?
I don't know where this falls in funding, but I've gotten a couple of inquiries about the entrance to our city and our City of Kerrville sign and maintenance on that, or repainting of it or something, just some TLC.
From 10 out there?
Yes,
So we maintain the sign.
okay,
Years ago, we were told to maintain all of it, all 4 corners of it, but we don't have an agreement with TxDOT. It's a really hilly, dangerous kind of area to
Yeah.
mow that TxDOT normally takes care of.
okay.
And so we'd like to push that back onto them, except that piece, Kerrville sign is ours, and so
Okay.
we'll continue to maintain that. But you were getting calls about, kind
The sign itself.
The
Make-
sign itself,
of putting some shine to it.
yeah,
We can look at that.
yeah, without it being costly.
Yes, ma'am.
Give me some paint, I'll go do it.
Michael,
Me and you can go do it.
Yeah, we'll go do it.
I'll help.
Yeah,
We'll have a council paint day.
there you go.
yeah, that would be awesome.
Be careful what you say.
Yeah. Make that happen
Okay,
next
we got a
week.
Just do it on board, just do it on
Just
board.
don't let Kim or Mike hear it, and we can go do it. Yeah.
Okay.
Get a waiver.
Aren't you still the city attorney?
I was the.
No, he gave up that
Oh, he probably doesn't even know that.
I know it, I've heard about 12 times.
It backfired on him.
It did. It did backfire.
That's funny.
So do you compare year to year about efficiencies in the departments, or like internally, like some kind of a measurement that kind of guys say, we're doing better here, and we do it because whether it's by population or it's by whatever. I mean, each department will have different measures, but are you tracking somehow to say, well, they're getting more efficient or we're getting less efficient?
Right, so every department has their own set of performance measures, and we talked about different ways of measures on Friday. depending on what their jobs are. And so they all measure, set their own goals, based on their own performance, and then measure that year to year. And I mean, I guess if you had a specific question to a specific department, they could speak to that, but basically, everybody has their own kind of set.
Yeah, but expense-wise.
Expense, yes.
budget-wise.
Yes,
Yes.
so to answer your question, yes, they do have it. One of the things that and to that point of the data metrics that we kind of showed convoluted a bit, we were having some issues with expenses of collecting that data and how to manipulate that data. So the directors have it, we get it. We are working on, and that's kind of what the Office of Innovation is really going to focus on. How do we efficiently now get that information from it so we can better track and better measure that for cost-based budgeting and priority-based budgeting. So we are getting better at trying to actually get that data and track it. They are collecting it, we just got to get it.
Yeah, they get their, monthly expense reports and those kind of things, and they have access, as we talked about, them putting in their own budgets within the software, so they have access to that ledger at all times, and so they can look at all the way back to 2015, I think, in our ledger. To see
Well, even something as simple as that budget compared to population size or whatever. I mean, it's not, I know you get down in the weeds and it can get really difficult, but I mean, it's just like an overall perspective. And secondarily, that do not, is other cities have their budgets, can we not compare how we are, like by population size, I know everybody's got a different size park system or whatever, but it still would give you some, how,
Yes,
where are we spending more money than other cities relatively? And
Yeah,
where
so
are we spending less?
that one's a tough one. And the reason why is I'm going to use Mont Bellevue as an example. Predominantly industry, they're putting in $1 billion of industry a year. Their tax rate's low, debt's relatively comparable, but their residential rate is a moot point. Or my old city, town of 5,000 bedroom community, all residential, 96% of the revenue was from rooftops. Where we're just talking about the general fund here. And so because we have that diversity of sales tax and everything, we try to find comparable cities that we can kind of, I'm not gonna say mirror, but hey, what are best practices? That's why we go to the conferences and look. But sometimes the apples to apples is very tough.
So there's no national organization that really compiles data like that?
Not really. GFOA is the Government Finance Officers Association. They do a lot of the best practices when it comes to the financing piece. Texas City Managers Association, and then each kind of individual association for department-specific public works. We go to there, we get best practices. What are they doing right? What are they not doing right? Kind of what Alicia said, R&D, rip off and duplicate. But as far as metrics, you'll get articles every now and then that'll kind of talk about things, but we try our
But
best.
they don't have any,
On the water fund, it's a little bit easier because you're looking at more of a very rate-specific kind of situation, but like in the general fund, our general fund might be made up of different departments and divisions than someone else's general fund. And so, like, for example, you've said parks, so I'll use parks. Our parks department also includes building and facility maintenance, so someone else might have that in a different, so if you took it as a
Right
total,
away.
you're not comparing apples to apples.
Right.
So,
Right,
so
okay, but we
a
can
great
see-
example would be, to Julie's point, water fund, you could probably find from an enterprise or a business perspective, you could do some good comparative analysis against other cities. But like a pool, for example, it all really kind of depends on what the community wants. Does the community want to have an amenity, or like events? Does the public want to have an amenity that people can go to, at no cost or a low cost? Or is that an enterprise fund that's trying to make money? Our pool is in the general fund, so it's kind of subsidized by the general fund, and we're okay with that.
so I don't think you're gonna find another city, but I think, in the banking business, we have data by industry code. We have, banks all across the country report in to an organization, and so our customer, whatever he or she is doing, well, we can compare to the average. And obviously, there's lots of outliers within the average, but the average is still telling you something.
Yes.
And so it wouldn't be much help, really, to try to just to find 2 or 3 cities you thought were sort of the same. I think it'd be a lot more help if somebody was putting together all the cities and maybe with stratify them by size a little bit, and then you can say, oh yeah, well, we're different here because of this or that, but at least you are looking at some, you know, you're in the ballpark or you're not in the ballpark, and why might that be?
Yeah, the enterprise funds, water, wastewater, sewer, garbage, electric, all of those are pretty much common industry standards. When you look at the general fund or city hall, it's kind of a holding company for a bunch of different outliers. Some are loss leaders, some are profit or enterprise. All the enterprise stuff you could pretty much get benchmark. A lot of the loss leaders you can kind of get a benchmark, but it really depends on each individual community. I would say the big differences for us in other cities that have diversity of revenue, sales tax, property tax, commercial, is we have a frozen tax rate. So everybody has different levels of frozen tax rates. Some have homestead exemptions. So when you're looking at just the general fund, it becomes really challenging just because it's very specific. You also have it to where we have to be structurally balanced within our general fund. So it's got to be, 0-0 at the bottom. Where other cities don't have to be structurally balanced, they could be mathematically balanced across the entire city. And so because we have to be structurally balanced within our general fund per the charter, accruals and all that really don't exist, so it's kind of a hybrid zero-based budgeting from the get-go. But yes, the industry stuff, we do get benchmarks. We can look at the industry. We do bring consultants in that do a lot of our long-range planning, master planning, that do bring in a lot of the industry standards into, rates, stormwater, water, wastewater. So there is that. It's just a little bit more difficult when it comes to the general fund.
And you mentioned that Friday. Speaking to your point, I think the five of us want to assure people that we are efficiently using tax money.
Yes.
And Kent's experience in his industry shows, well, here's a benchmark, and we should be roughly in this range, and either we have an outlier high or low.
Well, and there's lots of reasons why we won't be like the
Yeah.
ones that are in there, but the averages still tell a story.
That's true.
And so I think, it'd be good for us to know that story even, and sure, we can say, well, on average, we're different, from these other cities because whatever, that's fine. But it would pop out some things and say, well, we should be different here because this is the kind of city we are.
Yeah.
And so, but you gotta have some decent data to go.
Yeah, and thinking about the general fund and kind of diving into this rabbit hole just a little bit, so let's say we pick 3 cities and we say, all right, let's go.
No, big number cities. I'm not trying to find somebody like you, but to find a big set and then see what the averages are.
Yeah, well, okay, so taking the big averages, so where the complexity comes in is, all right, look at the average of tax rate across the board. Well, then you factor in what's the diversity of that tax rate. So, okay, you could probably find that. So then he goes in, okay, what's their water rate? What's their sales tax rate? Do they have an EDC and EIC? Do they have additional stuff? And so we can ask around to see if there's consultants that do that or what that would look like, but it does get very complicated.
I don't think we need to be spending a ton of money for consultants. The question is really, is there data that's out there that would normally be put together by some industry group that would, for the use of their members?
Yeah.
Because it's beneficial for them all to know whether they're being efficient or not and what kind of things they're doing right and wrong, and it ends up in the numbers.
Yeah.
Like in
And so-
T-Mill, maybe.
Yeah,
They do water and wastewater.
yeah, most of the we'll take a look at it.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of excuses about, well, we're different than that, but if you have a not large enough sample, the differences get kind of smoothed out.
Correct.
I can look on GeoPoa, Dalton. I've not
Yeah.
seen that on the.
I haven't
website,
seen it either, but we'll see, we'll explore it and see.
Yeah.
Just because there is so many variables in the general fund.
And on that theme, on Friday, we also talked about new technology which may improve productivity.
Yes.
And I think Ms. Torque, Mr. Barrera both talked about how there are some tools available that we could implement that would help make us more productive.
So, yeah, as far as efficiency goes, it'd be nice, and maybe there's something we need to work on every day.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what kind of a program that there is, is everything, from the bottom up, the people that are doing the job, they know you know, what's a pain
Yep.
to get done, and what's not a pain to get done, and how can we do it better? And it's amazing how much difference it can make if you really start at the bottom and say, you know, how can we make your job better? How can we do, what are we doing? You know, why are we doing it just because we've always done this way, and is there not a better way? And it's somebody, have we really ever gone through that process? And it's really like ongoing all the time.
It is.
And because efficiency is, you know, paramount. You know, we got, including having 2-digit codes instead of 3 or 4 or whatever, because everything, every little keystroke that you save is, you know, so you have to really, you know, you really pick it up. And, you know, one little thing seems small, but it gets applied across a lot of different areas. So anyway, I just, you know, because I know everywhere, not just in the city, but every business, everywhere, they, you know, efficiency is.
We are constantly looking at the efficiency, so we'll see what information we can find.
Be helpful. Thank you. Any other questions before we move on?
Comments or anything? Okay. So let's dive into asset replacement. So I know we brought you some information on this, I believe, back in May, and kind of what our budget team had done to work through this process over the past few years. And I feel like we have a really good, solid knowledge of what we own now, and a look at when that needs to be replaced. And some of our larger departments have internal replacement plans that they've put in place that really help us with that, because, you know, as Ken said, the guys that are using it are the ones that know. And so we really brought them kind of to the conversation, so that we know, just because this says on paper this should be what we should be doing, is that really what we should be doing? And kind of updating the condition, I guess, for lack of a better word. And we do have a software that's doing a really good job of tracking that now. And then working with the city garage to make sure we're doing that. So the big chart on the left there basically gives you where we are and then what's proposed. So at the top, you'll see the 2024 encumbered funds. Those are things that are already encumbered that we're going to be spending this year. They haven't been spent yet, but they will be. And then, so it gives you the proposed transfer in there that we talked about, estimated asset disposal. So anything that we sell that is an asset, the money from that goes right back into this fund. We'll talk about that just a little bit more in a minute. So you can see total revenues there. Before we can start talking about anything we want to add, we have to talk about what's already committed. So we have existing leases. So those are lease agreements that we already have in place citywide for the general fund. We have that liability already. And then moving on down to the proposed purchases, this is a list by department that you can see what we're proposing as of today. You know, that could change if, you know, revenues from disposals go up before the end of the year, or, you know, something happens, but, you know, of course, that will come back to you. Also keep in mind that any purchase that we make that's over $50,000 has to come to you for approval. And so, you know, anything that gets, whether it's allocated in the budget or not, you would see that purchase on a council agenda.
Can you break down the miscellaneous charges?
Yes.
Just give me some examples.
So that's another GASB thing. So typically, in the past, when we would incur a lease expense, it went into lease expense. So if there was a delivery charge, if there was a registration charge, if there was anything like that, it would get lumped in there. Well, the way GASB makes us record those capital leases now, we can't capitalize things like delivery fees, so we had to bring that out and just say, we're just calling it miscellaneous, so we actually had to assign it its own account number. So that was just, that's another GASB thing that we have to do.
Okay.
So that's things like that, delivery fees or registrations or things from the, when we receive those new vehicles or equipment. So everything on here that you're seeing is replacement. I'm not even gonna try to speak to the technology pieces there, but Charby's here if we want her to speak to any of that. But all of these are replacements, with the exception of at the very bottom where you see the John Deere tractor with the area mower, and Parks is here too and can speak to that. But what Shane and his team did this year is really kind of a right-sizing exercise in their department, and they went through and said, okay, do we need the heavy trucks that we have? No, so let's get rid of some of those and get some lighter trucks. Do we need the lighter trucks? Well, maybe we need more gators than we need trucks. And so looking at, you know, anytime we can reduce a vehicle, we're reducing insurance, we're reducing replacement cost. And so they really sold quite a bit of stuff. I don't know, like what's the dollars?
61.
So the 61,000 that they have sold from things that they just said, we just flat don't need this stuff, we need different stuff and how that works, so.
I cannot believe a stretcher costs $34,000.
You should see what it costs today, that was, would you, chief, what is it coming in?
Kodiak Laundry, the newest ones came out, we're at 55,000.
55,000?
55,000, so.
What is a stretcher? That's just,
I'm sorry?
well, what's a stretcher include?
That's it. So it's a stretcher to lift people, it's power load that attaches to the ambulance and loads it in. And it is just a stretcher or gurney, is what they are. So they're just, they have the technology on them now.
Joe said he could build one of those.
We want to use it.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the list by department as of right now, for what's being proposed for general fund asset replacement. And then I put to the right there, what was actually scheduled, compared to what we were proposing. And this is when we work through, with different departments and say, okay, this is what we show in the replacement schedule, how do you feel about what's on the replacement schedule? What's the biggest need and what order of priority, those kind of things. So we go through an entire exercise with each department to make sure that we're getting them the tools they need to do what they need to do. And then we've really been making an effort to do some right sizing this year. That's been one of our biggest pushes, and I see that over the next couple of years. Things that we really need to consider, we talked about this when we brought the asset replacement presentation to you, is what does that number really look like? And so, from a realistic standpoint, I mean, you can see right there, a little over $1 million. That's not leaving us a big fund balance there if something were to happen. Keeping in mind that we have moved excess funds to this fund over the years, we just haven't done a real good job of feeding it year over year. But when we talk about things like protecting the tax rate and reducing expenses, so to what degree, what could we do if that $725,000 stayed in the general fund? So what things did we ask departments to reduce that maybe they could still be doing operationally? And so the big question is, where does it come from? At the end of the day, where does money come from and how do we get there? But I just wanted you to kind of see a future look. So ambulance right now today, 335,000, give or take. Dump trucks, 160 to 170. Patrol vehicles, 100,000 easy for a full upfitting on a patrol vehicle. Tractors and heavy equipment, I mean, they vary, but I mean, they can get expensive real quick. We know we just replaced a street sweeper that was, 425,000. The paver was 425, but either way, they're super expensive. And then, we also have a need to add to our police fleet. We need a new special operations vehicle that needs to be replaced. So, and then our, fire truck replacement plan. So just as we're thinking about asset replacement, you can't just look at it year over year.
Just to kind of put things in perspective, back in 2020, I believe, as part of my tour, I got to look at the inside of a brand new ambulance that had just been delivered to the fire department, and it cost, I believe, $168,000 in 2020. So it's more than doubled in 4 years, the cost for that ambulance.
And they do replace them, the box and the chassis separate, so we use the box for longer.
Yeah.
Right, Chief, the box longer?
Correct, so that might have been, just listening to that price, may have been a remount for the cost of that. So
Right.
where they are, but it has
Well, the
gone up
whole thing looked brand new.
significantly, yeah. So
They've
we do
increased.
the entire ambulance every year, or every 7 years, we'll come back, or 8 years, we'll come back with a replacement program. So we'll refurbish the module and put on a new chassis. And then 14 years, or 14 to 16 years, the entire unit goes away. Right now, we're in that rotation. So.
Okay, so this is for an entire unit.
Correct. There are
Yes.
2 currently sitting in there that they're on order right now, and they are 2 brand new ambulances, and 2 of our older ones are going away. Some of those, the modules are 14, 15 years old.
It's a process, but yes, if you look at assets in general, I can tell you that police vehicles in 2020, where we could get the whole thing outfitted and ready and on the street for less than 60,000.
Yes, 60,000. Yeah.
So the IT equipment, it's closing 111, but these 3 items total of 147. Is that, or am I misunderstanding?
Yeah, we were talking about maybe pulling that $36,000 one out, we just didn't pull it out, that's my mistake.
Okay.
We were looking at trying to get a fund balance over 400,000 and how we could get there, so last night, we touched base with Charlie and said if you had to prioritize these, which would be, and that's the one that she said. So we were trying to keep that fund balance at 400,000, just in case we have an emergency or something that happens where we have to use that. So yeah, Mr. McKay, that's just a mistake, and
Okay.
let it out.
All right.
Yep. Any questions on asset replacement or comments on that? The next slide is really just a history of kind of what's happened on the asset replacement fund, and I've talked to you about this over the last couple of years, is budgeted transfers compared to actual transfers, and so it's very typical for us if we have excess funds, to request that we roll those there just because of the need. But you can see for a while, we relied pretty heavily on the the excess funds instead of budgeted. So several years there was nothing budgeted. And so what happens if you don't have excess funds? And then, we got into a situation to where we have to replace this. We don't have to replace this, and so we have things on the road that really shouldn't be on the road. And really, you get to the point where they cost you more to maintain than they do to replace, so. Trina, I'll let you-
Okay. So we brought interest revenue into, because it is a big deal this year and last year, ever since COVID, interest revenue, we've been earning pretty good on it. So this chart in front of you, it shows a comparison to the original budget and to actuals that actually happened over the last 6 years or so. We never really budgeted in excess for interest revenue because we don't depend on it. It's a very volatile market all the time. Depends on our cash flow, what projects we have going on, if, it's just too unknown. So just the chart here just shows you how in 2019 we issued some bonds for streets and drainage, and the interest rates are pretty decent, 2.5% or below. That's great on the consumer side, you're paying a low interest rate, but on the investment side, you're just riding the wave, not earning a whole lot, just a little bit at a time. Then COVID started to kick in and rates dropped even more so, which was great for us because we were able to refund some bonds, some old bonds we had, and get a lower interest rate. And then 2021 there, it just dropped. We were earning nada. So it's flipped now, obviously with inflation all the times, interest rates have come up. We've been earning pretty heavily. Majority of it is the GO bonds that we received. This, what you're looking at, is Fund 70, the Capital Improvement Fund. And we've been earning quite heavily, actually. In 23 and 24, we have an estimated in there. So we do work closely with our investment advisors. They give us, all the trends in the market, how the market's swinging, help us keep our portfolio balanced. Just telling us where they think we should get in, how long we should hold on some things. We try to diversify our portfolio as much as we can. We have commercial paper. Those are the shorter investments. We have some intermediate investments like our treasuries and just government-backed agencies. And our policy doesn't allow us to go longer than 3 years on an investment, so we really don't have much in there as long-term. But right now, the yield curve is inverted anyway, so the longer stuff is not, the rates aren't as well as the short-term right now.
Okay, so question for 23 and 24.
Mhm.
That ending balance there, is that primarily because of the public safety facility bonds?
You are correct.
And what are you doing with that money? Where does that money go?
Well, right now it's, we're investing it. We are
Okay.
heavily investing it. We actually, our debt covenants, we spoke with our advisors. They we don't want to put out more than half of what we were holding on to. The project
Right.
is moving. We start seeing expenditures go. We'll need that cash to pay the contractors. So we started out about half of the proceeds, $25 million, and the market's great, so we're earning the money on it. And as they mature, we'll analyze, make sure we have enough to cover expenditures as they're happening, and we'll start reducing how much we're investing, just slowly dwindling it down. But that's what's earning you 2.6 and 2.3 million right now.
It just stays in the general fund for right now. So,
Right now.
so, and that's kind of where council has some of the ability, I made a note on here, as we're looking at all of this, and while it's currently in the deficit state, as we work through the details, we have a fund balance, and that fund balance is about 25% of the general fund, and we currently have it funded at about 28%. And so all of that just stays into the general fund, into that fund balance, that council, should they need it or should they want to use it, can tap into that rainy day fund or use those to fund CIP projects, fixed asset replacement, one-off projects, or any number of things.
Okay, because I know that there were some things that were taken out of the plans for that KPD complex because it would have put us over budget based on, you know, inflation and all of that. So can that ending balance there on this interest revenue, can it go into funding some of the stuff that got kicked out? No.
So that 600,000 that council approved, what?
5, yeah.
5, that came from some of the interest revenue. So
Okay.
you can use it, or you potentially could. The question kind of really comes to council is that where we want to put all of those eggs? You know, with fixed asset replacement and sustainability a big component, and trying to fund some of those different funds, you know, for like capital improvement projects, or we could bring a plan and kind of go from there. But yes, there is some options that we can use. We just have to kind of discuss those further.
We also have a facility condition assessment coming
Yep.
to you soon, and so I think what you have to remember is, I think Ashley spoke to a little bit yesterday at EIC, I mean, we have to take care of what we have, and so the more stuff we add, the more liability we add, and so we're adding a brand new facility, we're gonna have money to take care of it, and so my advice would be, chuck some of that.
That's
We've
kind of
started-
where I was going with that, was because right now, the way the plan is set up, you've taken out, I think, the covered parking, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And if at all possible, if there's enough interest revenue left, I'd like to put that covered parking back in so that it protects all the $100,000 vehicles that were,
Let's use
So what we're doing now is you're right, it's a big project, and so there's contractor buyout meetings that we're having. We asked y'all to kind of supplement that budget with that $500,000 in the hopes that we'd be able to just turn it right back around and say, no, we've got the building covered. There are 3 or 4 alternates that were about $1 million in total. And so as we work through those buyouts, we'll see where we end up. And, you know, I think we talked about it as, our hope is we bring that $500,000 back to you, but it might not, right? We might need that for that building, that accessory building. The next 2 on that list are the covered parking, and we're looking at all the options, because, you know, sometimes you get the plans from the architects and the designers, and they want to give you all the stuff. And I'm
Yeah.
like, no, we need to cover an asset.
all this stuff, we just,
I don't,
yeah,
it doesn't need to look like
yeah.
it's behind a fence, it's behind a building, no one's gonna see it except for the staff. So it needs to be functional, and we
Yeah.
all agree to that. And so, we're still working through that process. We'll bring
Okay.
back.
One thing we are having to make sure we consider is arbitrage liability. So when you are earning really great on your bond proceeds, we're a tax exempt organization. So if we end up earning more than we are paying on our bonds, we are subject to a rebate liability. The calculation is very extensive, and I think it's a 5-year term that they're evaluating us before the IRS determines how much we would owe. So we had our initial calculation for fiscal year '23. It's close to $500,000 of what we've earned already that we would have to pay back. But it dwindles out as project expenses go out the door and
Yeah.
the calculation falls out into play. But so that is something we have to consider so that we can set aside to make sure we cover it. And we would like to retain some of the interest earnings for that penalty if there was one. So there's many factors determining how much we would want to pull from the earnings.
And we also have, we started, you know, this past year, we budgeted a $100,000 transfer to reserve fund for facility maintenance. We just said, we're gonna start somewhere. That's sitting in CIP in a reserve fund. We've actually created a fund all by itself now so that we can move money, like when we sold the property in Centerpoint, that can go in there to what we're gonna call a facility fund, whatever it's ended up being named, we can name it whatever, but for now, it's called a facility fund, and we can, you know, address that going forward. But, you know, part of the recommendation would be to move some money into that fund for the sustainability piece, because we have a lot of stuff that we're, you know, we continue to say we're issuing debt because we're doing maintenance, we're, you know, doing this, that, or we need to, what if we wanted to go and buy a piece of property, I don't know, or whatever. You gotta have the cash set aside to do that, and right now we don't. I mean, we have fund balance in the general fund, but we've never really set up a designated maintenance fund outside of regular operations. If something big happens, it has to come out of contingency.
Yeah.
If something really big happens, we're issuing debt, and so
Right.
I think kind of the idea behind the facility fund, and more to come when we bring the facility assessment to you, and you get to hear from that vendor what their findings were. We have some pretty big needs out there as far as the maintenance, and so I think if we don't start really looking at what that's gonna look like down the line, and the way I look at this interest revenue is I'm gonna call it found money, because it's not something we had to tax someone for, it's not something, and it's not gonna last forever, we can't count on this, and we know the rates aren't gonna stay this, we know the cash isn't gonna stay at the level we have it now. As we spend those project dollars down, that cash goes away, then your income revenue is gonna be less and less, and so, we just have to look at kind of the here and now, and, what can we do to make it last as long as we can for us, and do its best work, I think, so.
Yeah, the two kind of biggest things simplistically, the facilities assessment is kind of our current state of city facilities, what needs to be repaired, maintained. And then the second one, we do a great job at kind of tracking our CIP, our capital improvement projects. We have a lot of master plans that kind of talk about what those projects and priorities are, but we really don't have those on a 3, 5, or 10-year plan of how we're going to fund them through cash, through bonds, through whatever, and what that kind of looks like. And so over the next kind of 8 months to a year, those are some of the things this next year we really want to have a good grasp on, so we can figure out, do we take some of this extra found money and fund some of these projects or fund some of these funds for the long term. So those are some of the things that we are trying to build into and work on.
A lot more to come on that. We just wanted to kind of bring it to the table, especially talking about asset replacement and kind of, the general fund's doing the best it can, I think, to fund that, but you can see we're not even funding it to the extent that we need to replace what's on the schedule to be replaced, so. We just want to make sure everybody has the tools to do their job. Any questions on asset replacement or anything else on that we just covered? So kind of the last thing on our list, and again, I'm going to let Tina speak to this because she's a resident expert on this, is just kind of a quick review of debt. This can get a little bit complicated, but one of the things we didn't talk about, Trina, but if you could, is like, I know this is just general fund debt, so I think that's important to know how it's paid.
Yes, so strictly general fund debt, it is paid by property tax, and total going out the door this year is $5 million there. And as you can see, we are, if you look at that bottom chart there, that our debt cannot cause the INS portion of the tax rate to, it can't be more than 25% of the overall tax rate, the INS portion. So if you look at that bottom chart there, that's just a little 10-year history of the INS rate versus the M&O rate to give you the overall tax rate. And you can see that we are kind of maxed out there at the 25% right now. GO bonds obviously cause that, so we're at our cap for the moment. I mean, once we get these new properties in online on the tax roll, revenues will increase and things will adjust naturally. But for the moment, we're just kind of there. The debt schedule for this year, we are up $335,000. That's primarily due to tax notes for the fire trucks that we issued earlier this year. So pretty much that's all I have on the debt.
I think just the big thing here is that this is the only component of our debt that's paid for by property tax. We go back to that, it seems like in every public conversation we have is what gets paid for by what, and so.
I do want to note that of that $5 million, EIC do have debt in here. It's backed by the city's credit rating, but the sports complex, is River Trail in here? Yes. So they transfer in their portion of their bills to the general fund to help pay for this, but it all goes into our tax calculation.
Because it's backed,
Yes.
but they do pay their portion. We're at $1 million, right?
Yes. $1,091,000.
Yes. Any debt questions?
Council, you'll have any questions on not only the debt, but anything to do with the information you received at the workshop? Any feedback for staff?
anything you'd like us to bring back to you, anything you'd like to see different.
As always, Ms. Behrens has an open door. You have a question, ask her. She has been a good tutor for me several times.
We didn't give you this, but this is a sheet where we gave you the detail on expenses. This is a detail on the revenues. And so just so you can look at a little more detail. Do keep in mind, golf revenues, that are usually pretty substantial. They're significantly reduced, so don't be concerned when you see that. It's just because of the golf project. And so we've done some pretty intensive deep dive calculations on that, and we feel pretty comfortable with the revenues and expenses over there and the impact that it's having to the general fund, which is pretty negligible at this point.
Mr. Harris, any questions?
Not right now, sir.
On the replacement needs for the united asset replacement, so you're saying about $1.5 million per year, and,
Would be ideal.
and so we're not spending that much this year,
No,
first
sir.
proposed.
Yes, sir. We always try to keep our goal has been, between $400,000 and $500,000 to keep as an emergency. That way if something does come up and has to be replaced, for whatever reason, we have some money to do that with without having to touch the general fund balance. We try to protect that and build that where we can.
So is that, so you think $1.1 million plus the 400, you got frazzled, so to speak, to make $1.5 million? Or just those in the?
Well, yeah, the total expenditures for this coming up year, right at 1.1, that's what's being proposed right now. And that would leave us 370,000, that's that 36,000 we were talking about, that was,
Right.
yeah, I did the narrative, but the chart was already done, so
Right.
we were talking about maybe taking that $36,000 expenditure out of there to get us back
You
up
get
to
up
that
to 400, but
400,000.
between the two, you got $1.5 million.
Yes,
Yes,
and every year, that's about what it is on the replacement schedule.
And each year going forward, we're gonna start forecasting some of the stuff out, over the next year. How do we make sure we slowly increase it? Just like roads, we increased it 100,000, same thing with these funds. How do we slowly start incrementally increasing these things to start funding the full 1.5?
yeah. And that's been built out in the forecast for the last couple of years, where we started building out that increase year over year.
Any questions, Mr. McKinney?
No.
Anything you'd like to see different or in more detail or less detail?
Any questions, Ms. Hughes?
I'm good.
I think this has been a good presentation, thank you. I know it's a conversation that we'll be having for the next few months. I do wish that the charter proposition that would have allowed y'all more time had passed, but I know y'all,
We'll get it done.
not
We always have.
buckle up and go.
It just, it's a nice, not a have to, but yeah, we'll get it done.
Any other comments, Mr. Rice?
No, Mayor, I think we're good.
You've got funeral procession fees. And that amount is decreased by 2,000. Are we expecting less processions?
Those are just based on historical,
Less deaths?
yeah.
It's
Usually,
healthier.
those are kind of hard to predict, so we base them on historical averages.
Okay.
We don't wanna, I don't wanna overestimate something like that, that's such a small piece.
know.
I've been made fun of for budgeting the taxi fees in there, but I'm not gonna turn my head on $75. It's $75
Yeah.
we're putting in the budget, so I know we're gonna get it, so it's going in there. Yeah, it's just based on historical averages. Some of that there's really nothing we can tie it to, we just base it on historical.
Okay.
Well, and some of the
It's
things,
a downward trend.
We hope.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping for.
Oh, people, not, more people are dying, that's what it is.
Maybe they're just not doing
They're not doing
processionals like they used to,
processions,
yeah.
Green Nation.
Could be some traditional stuff changing too, things have
Yeah.
changed compared to what they used to be as far as the way.
Yeah, no services. and
Yeah,
stuff.
the way people do services and things have changed, and so that can be part of that. So, but yeah, if you have any questions on any of that detail, I know that's something we haven't really presented to you before. But it's just a little bit different look, because it's a lot of information to get into 20 slides. When you're looking at, 100 departments and, or divisions, I should say. It's a lot of information to have to try to digest when you don't look at it every day.
Anything else, council?
Where are we at on our unsupported debt? percentage-wise?
Not property tax supported debt, is that what you mean?
Mm-hmm.
We don't have any in the general fund, you're talking about like the water fund, this enterprise.
It has to be
Well,
35%, less than
it's
35% of our overall
the overall
expenditures.
expenses on the government side, and it's less than that.
I haven't got there yet, but I want to say probably about 29.
Yeah, without the last bonds that we issued. We were,
Roughly, a few weeks.
I don't think there's a percentage in
And
it
then,
yet.
and then we'll probably do.
Yeah, we were 27% last year. We can't exceed 35%. It's gonna be, yeah, some little bit of stuff is decreased and then the revenue bonds
Certified
increased
tax-
by
After we have
20%.
certified tax rolls
We're still
and sit down with
a lot less than that, but again, enterprise lets revenue base, so you have to be careful with what you're committing to against your rate
And
here.
we'll do water and CIP in July.
Yeah, just a reminder, we're gonna have another workshop about enterprise funds,
Enterprise funds
probably in
and
July, and then we'll
CIP.
have a
Yeah.
full-blown executive summary after the certified tax rolls are in our hands.
Yes, that is correct.
Anything else, council?
And then, of course, our doors are open for
Of
anything.
course. Anything else from staff? If not, I'm gonna adjourn the meeting at 11:38.
I think that